with an MMA legend, a man that I've been able to share this cage with, a guy that has just put on incredible fights throughout his career.
I always told myself these last 4 fights, I signed with Bellator, I told myself if I lose at all in these last 4 fights, then it's about that time. I've had a nice long run. I've done a lot of great things, was able to do a lot of amazing accomplishments.
And the legend, Benson Henderson.
The lightweight division has been a primetime weight class for many years. And while names like BJ Penn and Khabib Nurmagomedov come to mind first when discussing its all-time greats, stars like Anthony Pettis, Donald Cerrone, Rafael dos Anjos, Eddie Alvarez, Michael Chandler and more made their living competing here consistently from their earliest days. Of course, in the modern game, the likes of Islam Makhachev, Justin Gaethje, Charles Oliveira, and Dustin Poirier have all already done more than enough to ensure that their names go down in the history books. But oftentimes in 155-pound discussions, there is one name that's left out. Last month at Bellator 292, a bona fide legend of the division hung up his gloves after coming up short against the great Usman Nurmagomedov, leaving behind a legacy worthy of the highest praise. Smooth Benson Henderson was a remarkable talent, a supremely well-rounded fighter who was an innovator within the sport during a pivotal time for its growth. The calf kicks that were such a prominent part of today's game were being used by this guy a decade previously. And in terms of weaponizing pace and cardio, Henderson was truly a very skilled operator. Born on November 16, 1983, in Colorado Springs, Colorado. In his earliest days, he was a multi-sport athlete, excelling in both wrestling and taekwondo. But it wasn't until he discovered mixed martial arts that he truly found his calling. After graduating from college, Henderson made his professional MMA debut in 2006, quickly establishing himself as a force to be reckoned with. Back-to-back finishes saw Smooth open up his fighting account in style, and while a 40-second submission loss would follow in fight number 3, Benson's form would not dip again for several more years. After going an impressive 7-1 on the regional scene, in 2009, Henderson signed with the WEC, a promotion known for its high-octane fights and talented roster, a roster that would soon be mixed with the UFC's. In fact, at this time, the WEC were largely responsible for putting the lighter weight classes on the map in the US. He wasted no time making an impact, rattling off 2 victories by way of finish to earn a shot at the interim lightweight title, taking on the future legend Donald "Cowboy" Cerrone. Henderson would get his hand raised in a fight of the night winning effort, setting up a unification bout with the undisputed champ. On October 10, 2009, Henderson faced off against Jamie Varner in a thrilling back-and-forth battle. Despite being largely outworked in the first 2 rounds, Henderson refused to back down, and eventually found his way to a standing guillotine choke out of nowhere in the 3rd to claim the WEC Lightweight belt. 6 months later, he returned to the cage as a defending champion, rematching Donald "Cowboy" Cerrone in a highly anticipated title bout. This time, it did not take him 5 rounds to get the win. No, Benson was able to find his way to the guillotine choke within 2 minutes, latching up Cerrone's neck for the tap in the earliest exchanges. But it was his next fight that would go down as one of the most memorable in MMA history. In December of 2010, Henderson faced off against Anthony Pettis in one of the greatest fights the sport had ever seen. It was a legendary contest that showcased many different facets of the MMA skill set. An even pairing that combined some amazing grappling and wrestling exchanges with a striking battle that just got better and better as the fight went on. Things were pretty difficult to score coming into that final round, but Pettis lived up to his Showtime moniker in the final seconds, delivering perhaps the most famous knockdown in MMA history. Indeed, he couldn't quite get the finish, but this moment of genius certainly won him the fight. Henderson had lost his title, but his climb was far from over. In 2011, the WEC merged with the UFC, and Henderson found himself facing a new set of challenges. But he continued to thrive, going 3-0 in his new home, earning a title shot against reigning champion Frankie Edgar in February of 2012. That first bout between the two was a razor-thin affair, with both fighters showcasing their elite striking and grappling skills. In the end, Henderson emerged victorious via unanimous decision, claiming the UFC lightweight belt and cementing his status as one of the top fighters in the world. He doubled down on his status as champion with yet another decision win over Frankie. Again, not without its fair share of controversy. He would find himself at 3 title defenses after scoring back-to-back wins over contenders Nate Diaz and Gilbert Melendez, setting up a rematch with his old foe Anthony Pettis. This time, it was clear that Showtime was the one with the momentum, and it didn't take him 5 rounds to find his moment of magic. No, the submission came at the end of the first round, an armbar that brought Henderson's title reign to a crashing halt. The Pettis era of the lightweight division had officially begun, and while Benson was able to rack off wins over Josh Thompson and Rustam Khabilov, a ferocious first-round finish from the great Rafael dos Anjos and a loss to Donald Cerrone in their trilogy fight seemed to signal the end of his time in the top flight. But while many fans checked out at this point, all was not lost for Henderson. He went 2-0 as a welterweight, defeating George Masvidal and Brandon Thatch before signing a multi-fight deal with Bellator. And though his promotional record of 7-7 would have you believe that his best days were behind him, which certainly was true to some extent, Henderson was always competitive in there for the most part. Benson managed to extend his career for over 10 years after losing his title to Showtime Pettis, and it's that longevity that really does speak to the type of athlete he is. A smart fighter who never allowed his training to dip, Benson always came to the Octagon in supremely good condition, even in his late 30s. And again, he deserves credit for his innovation in the cage, his fighting style that was totally unique to him. Whether it was his early use of the calf kick or even when he decided to punch his opponents in the legs, Benson was always keeping his adversaries guessing in there. By the time he finally hung up his gloves, the MMA community did come around to some extent, giving him props as one of the greatest lightweights of his era. But we want to really make the argument for his inclusion as one of the divisional greats. The dude's resume is truly outstanding. He beat Donald Cerrone twice, Frankie Edgar twice, albeit controversially. He beat Jim Miller and Clay Guida, dominated Nate Diaz, beat Gilbert Melendez and Josh Thompson. He went up to welterweight and defeated George Masvidal over 5 rounds. And though his Bellator run saw him come up short more often than he would like, Henderson was very rarely an easy night out. Or at least, he wasn't until Father Time caught up with him, making his decision to retire after a first-round loss to Usman Nurmagomedov admirable. A lot of his best wins were narrow decisions, and in some ways, this does make fans sleep on him a bit. But Henderson fought the best of the best across a career that spanned 17 years, and even when the wheels appeared ready to fall off, he never did fully slip out of the elite levels of his division. Despite losing many of his bigger contests in Bellator, it's not like he was fighting chumps. No, he took on Usman Nurmagomedov, Michael Chandler, Brent Primus, and both Pitbull brothers, Patricio and Patricky. And even when his final career victory came, a one-sided beatdown of Irishman Peter Queally in Dublin, it was clear that Benson hadn't lost his smoothness. At 3 title defenses in the UFC, that puts him on the same level as Khabib Nurmagomedov, BJ Penn, and Frankie Edgar numerically, although he is often forgotten about in discussions where those 3 names are mentioned prominently. The dude fought for vast stretches of his career with a toothpick in his mouth. If that's not commitment, we don't know what is. Smooth Benson Henderson is an all-time great of the 155-pound weight class, and we thought a celebration of his legendary career would be fitting at this time, because with him now retired, the sport has truly lost another icon.